The night was cruel. The wind hissed through the valley, heavy with the scent of iron and fire. The sound of the distant train rolled like thunder through the mountains, a warning of what was to come. Far down the tracks, beneath the faint shimmer of the moon, the Alpha King lay bound, wrists torn, body bruised, his golden eyes dimmed but not broken. Chains bit into his flesh, silver links that sizzled against his skin each time he tried to move. He had once been the ruler of every pack that roamed the northern realms, feared, obeyed, and worshipped. Now he was nothing more than prey, left by traitors to die in the cold, his body meant to be crushed under the roaring steel of the train. The betrayal burned deeper than the silver. It was not by strangers that he had fallen, but by those who had once sworn loyalty. And as the night deepened, the Alpha King waited, not for mercy, but for the end. Miles away, in the hollow remains of an abandoned village, an Omega stirred awake to the cry of her child. The pup whimpered softly, sensing the storm in the air, his tiny body trembling as thunder cracked across the sky. The Omega, Alara, pulled him close, her tattered cloak barely keeping out the cold. Life had not been kind to her, her mate long gone, her home reduced to ashes, her scent always tainted by the label of weakness that the world forced upon her. Yet her spirit had never broken. She rose from her bed of straw, every muscle aching, every breath a reminder of hunger. The pup, barely 3 winters old, clung to her neck as she stepped outside. The world smelled of metal and fear. And something else, something wild. A scent that should not have been there. It was faint, almost lost beneath the chill of the night, but unmistakable. Power, pain, blood, and alpha. Her heart stuttered. No alpha should be near this part of the realm. This was the borderland, abandoned, cursed, and silent since the war. Yet the scent was real. She followed it, cautious, driven by instinct rather than reason. The pup whimpered, clutching her harder, but she whispered soft comfort against his hair. Just a little longer, she breathed, though her words were for herself as much as for him. The forest opened before her in a sweep of silver and shadow. The moonlight spilled across the ground, painting the rails ahead in pale light. And then she saw it, a figure bound to the tracks, motionless, barely breathing. The metallic scent was overwhelming now, mingled with burnt flesh. Silver. Her pulse quickened. No Omega dared go near an Alpha in such a state. Their energy, even dying, could break the weak. But something in her heart overrode her fear, perhaps the same part of her that had once believed kindness still mattered in a cruel world. She ran. The pup cried out softly as she stumbled down the slope, her bare feet slipping against the stones. The closer she came, the more clearly she could see him, the broad shoulders, the powerful form, the golden hair matted with dirt and blood. His body was trembling with suppressed power, but his eyes were closed, his breath shallow. Alara knelt beside him, her hands shaking. The silver chains hissed against her skin, burning her palms, but she ignored it. Her mind raced. She didn't know who he was, only that he was not meant to die this way. The ground beneath them vibrated faintly. The train was coming. In the distance, a whistle cut through the air, a sound both mournful and merciless. Panic clawed at her throat. The chains were too strong for her alone. She tore at them anyway, her fingers bleeding as she pulled and twisted. The pup, frightened by the noise, began to cry. The Alpha stirred. For the first time, his eyes opened, molten gold flickering in the moonlight. For an instant, she froze. It was like looking into the heart of the sun. He tried to speak, but no sound came. His lips moved only once, a single word she could not hear but understood. Run. She shook her head violently, grabbing a nearby rock and smashing it against the lock. Sparks flew. The whistle screamed again, louder now, closer. The earth itself seemed to tremble with the coming train. Please, she whispered through gritted teeth, just hold on. The metal bent, groaned, but refused to break. Desperation drove her strength beyond reason. The pup, realizing his mother's distress, pushed at the lock with his tiny hands as if to help, his small body glowing faintly with energy. And then, with a crack, the chain split. The Alpha gasped, his chest rising sharply as his power surged free, wild and unstable. The air rippled with it, sending sparks into the night. Alara dragged him off the tracks just as the train roared past, its iron body screaming against the rails, wind tearing through the night like a beast unleashed. They tumbled into the dirt, the sound of the train fading into the distance, leaving only silence and the stench of smoke. For a long moment, none of them moved. The pup whimpered, pressing his face into his mother's shoulder. Alara's arms shook as she held the Alpha, his weight heavy, his breath shallow but steadying. When she dared to look at him again, his gaze met hers, no longer distant, no longer fading. It was sharp now, aware, filled with something raw and dangerous. Yet beneath that danger, she saw confusion, and a flicker of gratitude. She didn't know then that she had just pulled the Alpha King of the Northern Realms from the edge of death. She didn't know that her small act of mercy would change not just her life, but the fate of every pack that roamed their world. All she knew was that he was alive, and she had saved him. The moon dipped lower, silver light spilling across their tangled forms, the broken king, the poor Omega, and her trembling pup. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, destiny shifted. And in the stillness that followed, the Alpha King whispered, barely a breath, but enough to make the night itself pause. "Who are you?" Alara did not answer. She only looked at him with tired, frightened eyes and whispered back, "Someone who couldn't walk away." And so began the bond that neither silver nor fate could ever break. Morning came slowly, stretching its pale fingers across the valley as though afraid to touch the wreckage of the night before. Mist clung to the earth, curling through the broken rails and scattered stones like breath rising from a wounded beast. The train tracks were silent now, but the echo of thunder still lived in the air, a ghostly memory of the roaring machine that had almost taken a life. Deep within the forest, in a hollow made of moss and ash, a small fire struggled to stay alive. Alara crouched beside it, feeding it with twigs, her fingers trembling from exhaustion. Every muscle in her body ached. Her palms were blistered and raw, streaked with silver burns from the chains she had torn apart. But she didn't care. Her eyes, rimmed red from lack of sleep, never strayed far from the figure lying motionless across from her. The Alpha King. He looked both impossibly powerful and unbearably fragile, like a storm barely contained beneath skin. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. The firelight revealed the silver wounds that streaked his arms and throat, the marks glowing faintly as though alive. His body had begun to heal, but the process was slow, hindered by whatever poison still lingered in his blood. Alara's pup, Aaron, slept beside him, tiny fingers clutching the Alpha's torn sleeve. She had tried to move the child away, afraid that the Alpha's energy might harm him, but Aaron had refused to let go. Even in sleep, he clung to the stranger they had saved, as though he sensed something she could not yet name. Alara sighed softly and turned her gaze to the forest beyond the firelight. The trees stood tall and still, their branches whispering secrets only the wind could hear. The danger was not over. Whoever had left the Alpha to die would come looking once they realized he was missing. And if they found him here, found her, there would be no mercy. But what choice had she had? She could have walked away, left him to his fate. The thought twisted her stomach now. She had lived her whole life on the edge of cruelty, abandoned by those stronger, used by those richer. She knew what it meant to be forgotten. She could not become like them, not even to save herself. When the fire finally steadied, she sat back on her heels and studied him again. In the light of day, he seemed almost unreal, too regal for the dirt that clung to him. His features were sharp, sculpted by something greater than time. His hair, tangled and streaked with dried blood, still caught glints of gold when the sun touched it. But it was the faint tremor of his fingers that held her attention, as though even in unconsciousness, he fought against invisible chains. She reached out hesitantly, brushing her fingertips against his wrist. His skin was fever hot, his pulse uneven. Beneath her touch, power hummed, deep, ancient, and fierce. It pulsed through her hand like a heartbeat that wasn't her own. She drew back quickly, heart pounding, afraid she had woken him. But his breathing remained steady, his eyes closed. For hours she kept watch, feeding the fire, cooling his wounds with damp cloth, whispering small prayers to gods she no longer believed in. The day passed in silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the occasional cry of her pup. It was nearly dusk when he stirred. At first, it was only a flicker, a twitch of his jaw, a small sound caught in his throat. Then his eyes opened, golden and sharp, cutting through the dim light like blades. Alara froze. For a moment, neither moved. His gaze found her immediately, unerring, focused. She could feel the power in it, heavy, commanding, the gaze of a king even when broken. Her breath caught, every instinct urging her to lower her head, to show submission. But she didn't. She couldn't. She met his eyes with quiet defiance, though her hands trembled against her knees. He tried to speak, but his voice came out rough, the words caught in pain. He swallowed, struggling against weakness. Where? His throat closed before he could finish. You're safe, she whispered, though she knew safety was a fragile lie. You were hurt. You need rest. His eyes shifted, scanning their surroundings, the crude shelter of branches, the small fire, the sleeping pup beside him. Confusion flickered across his face, followed by something darker, suspicion. His instincts were waking before his strength did. He tried to sit up, but the effort sent a groan through his chest. His hand gripped the earth, and for an instant, the ground itself seemed to tremble in response. The raw power of an alpha, even half dead, was enough to make the air hum. Don't move, Alara said quickly, pressing a hand against his shoulder. Your wounds. He looked at her hand on him, then back at her face. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, despite the pain. You freed me. She hesitated, unsure whether it was a question or an accusation. You would have died. Perhaps I was mean. T2. There was no emotion in his tone, only exhaustion, the kind that went beyond the body, down into the soul. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression stopped her. He turned his head toward the sleeping child, his gaze softening for the first time. Your pup, he murmured. Yes, she replied quietly. His name is Aaron. He smells of sunlight. A faint, bewildered smile ghosted across his lips, the kind that came from a place of disbelief. Strange. In a world like this. Alara didn't know how to answer. There was a sadness in his words that felt older than either of them. She busied herself with the fire instead, though her thoughts were spinning. Who was this man? She had guessed he was an alpha the moment she had caught his scent, but there was something more. Something regal in the way his voice shaped even the simplest words. Something unyielding in the way he looked at the world, as if he expected it to bow. When she finally dared to look at him again, his eyes were still on her. You are not of any pack I know, he said. I'm not of any pack at all. His brow furrowed. An omega without pack ties? You would not have survived this long. She gave a small, bitter laugh. And yet, here I am. He watched her in silence for a long while. Then, slowly, he nodded, as though acknowledging a truth he didn't yet understand. The fire crackled between them, casting shifting shadows over his face. For the first time, Alara noticed the faint scars that marked his temple, old, deliberate, like the brands of royalty. The realization struck her suddenly, sharp as a blade. She drew in a breath. You're not just an alpha, are you? He didn't answer, but the flicker in his eyes was enough. Alara looked away, heart racing. The stories she'd heard as a child came rushing back, of the Alpha King, ruler of all packs, born of moonlight and bound by ancient blood. The one who had disappeared after the last great war, leaving chaos behind. If he was who she thought he was, then she had not just saved a man. She had saved a legend. Night deepened around them, and the forest grew quieter, the air thick with secrets. The Alpha lay back against the ground, exhaustion pulling him toward sleep again. But before he closed his eyes, he spoke, barely above a whisper. "You should have left me there." Alara met his gaze through the dim firelight. "I couldn't." His lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, not quite disbelief. "Then your mercy will be your undoing." She said nothing. The words were not cruel, only resigned, as if he spoke from experience. When his breathing slowed, and his eyes finally closed, Alara sat in silence for a long time. The pup stirred, curling closer to the alpha's side as if drawn to his warmth. The sight made her heart ache in ways she didn't understand. Outside, the forest whispered again, carrying with it the scent of danger, faint but growing. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, their voices echoing like prophecy. Alara's gaze drifted to the alpha once more. He was her burden now, whether she wanted him or not. She didn't know what fate she had invited into her life that night, but as she watched the faint rise and fall of his chest, she knew one thing with certainty. Whatever power had led her to the tracks had not done so by accident. And whatever future awaited her, it began here, beside a dying king and her sleeping child, in the ashes of mercy and the quiet breath of destiny. Dawn broke quietly over the forest, a pale breath of light creeping across the moss and stones. The mist still clung to the ground, soft as gauze, wrapping the world in half-forgotten dreams. The scent of rain lingered in the air, fresh and sharp, as though the heavens themselves had wept for what the night had witnessed. Alara woke to silence. Her pup still slept soundly beside her, curled up against the warmth of the fire's dying embers. The alpha, too, was still, but something in the stillness felt different. Alive, watchful. His wounds had begun to heal through the night. The angry burns from the silver were fading, the raw edges knitting together with unnatural speed. His breathing was deeper now, steady and measured, like that of a man who had walked through the storm and decided, against reason, to stay. Alara rose quietly, stepping outside the hollow to fetch water from the stream. The forest opened before her in shades of green and gold, the morning light dripping through the leaves like liquid honey. Birds sang softly in the distance, unaware of the power that slept among them. Yet even in peace, she could not shake the feeling of being watched. The world beyond this fragile clearing was dangerous, not just for her and her pup, but for the man she had saved. Whoever had left him to die would not rest. Power like his did not vanish quietly. She filled the wooden bowl, her reflection rippling in the surface, tired eyes, tangled hair, skin marked with soot and scars. There was no trace of the girl she had once been, full of laughter and trust. Only a survivor remained. When she returned, she found him awake. The Alpha King was sitting upright now, his back against the earthen wall of the shelter. The firelight danced across his face, throwing shadows over the sharp lines of his jaw, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. His golden eyes tracked her movements as she entered, calm, unblinking, predatory in their focus. For a moment, she hesitated, the air between them taut with something she couldn't name. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was awareness, a recognition had something ancient and immense lay within the man she had saved. She knelt beside him without speaking, dipping a cloth into the bowl and pressing it gently against his skin. His gaze followed the motion, every flick of her wrist reflected in those molten eyes. When the cool water touched his arm, a faint sound escaped him, not pain, but memory. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he spoke, his voice was roughened by more than injury. "They bound me with silver, laced with wolfsbane." Alara's hand froze mid-motion. He went on, words slow and deliberate, like someone walking through the ruins of a nightmare. "My generals, the ones I trusted most. They said it was justice, that I had broken the old code. That the throne was no longer mine." The weight of those words hung between them like smoke. Alara didn't know much of the politics of alphas. Omegas like her were not meant to know. But even she had heard whispers, tales of rebellion, of the great packs fracturing after their king's disappearance. Some said he had been slain by rivals. Others claimed he had gone mad. None had ever spoken of betrayal. Why would they turn against you? She asked softly. His eyes opened again, not gold now, but molten amber, fierce and alive. Because they feared what I was becoming. He looked away then, toward the forest beyond the shelter, where sunlight filtered through the trees like shards of glass. A king who no longer wanted war is a king who invites rebellion. They mistook mercy for weakness. The faintest trace of bitterness touched his voice. They forgot that mercy is harder than blood. Alara said nothing. She simply listened, to the edge of sorrow beneath his calm, to the exhaustion that years of rule had carved into him. He turned his gaze back to her. You should not have helped me. Those who hunt me will come for anyone in my shadow. I've lived in shadows all my life, she murmured. Yours can't be worse than the rest. Something flickered in his expression then, surprise, perhaps. Or respect. He studied her for a long time, as though trying to see beyond her words. You speak without fear. I've had enough of fear. He almost smiled, almost. And yet, you tremble. Her breath caught. She hadn't realized until that moment that her hands were indeed shaking, not from fear, but from the unbearable nearness of him. From the way his voice seemed to sink beneath her skin, low and magnetic. She rose quickly, turning away under the pretense of tending to the fire. The pup stirred, sitting up and blinking sleepily. The alpha's gaze softened as the small child crawled closer. Aaron's hair was a tumble of dark curls, his eyes wide and unguarded. He approached the stranger with the innocence only a child could possess. To Alara's shock, the boy reacted. Head out and touched the alpha's arm. The man stilled. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand, not in rejection, but in quiet wonder. His massive fingers curled gently around the tiny hand that had dared to touch him. Something in that simple contact changed the air. The alpha's power, wild and burning, softened, as though the storm within him bowed to the calm of the child's heartbeat. Alara watched, transfixed. Aaron giggled suddenly, pressing his forehead against the alpha's arm. The sound was small but bright, like the first note of a song after silence. And in that moment, the impossible happened, the Alpha King smiled. It was faint, barely there, but it transformed his face. The harshness faded, the weight lifted. For an instant, he looked less like a king and more like a man remembering what it meant to be alive. Alara turned away quickly, afraid he might see the warmth that rose in her eyes. She busied herself with the fire, though her thoughts were no longer her own. When she looked back again, the Alpha was staring into the flames, his expression distant. How long has it been since you trusted anyone? He asked quietly. She hesitated, long enough to forget why it mattered. He nodded slowly, as though he understood too well. Trust is the rarest form of courage. You have more of it than most warriors have known. The words should have been praise, but they carried the weight of a confession. The forest rustled outside, a whisper, a warning. The scent of smoke shifted, mingled now with something sharper. Danger. The Alpha's head snapped up, every muscle tensing. His instincts, though dulled by weakness, were still sharper than any blade. They've found us, he murmured. Alara froze. Who? The ones who betrayed me. They track by scent, by blood. He pushed himself to his feet, staggering slightly, but power already thrumming through his veins again. We have to move. Alara caught the pup in her arms, fear tightening her chest. You can barely stand. His eyes blazed. I can still fight. Outside, the distant crack of branches echoed through the trees, hunters closing in. The Alpha stepped into the light, shoulders squared, aura unfurling like a storm cloud. For the first time, Alara saw what he truly was, not just a man, but a force carved from the wild. The air trembled with his presence. Leaves quivered. The fire roared higher, responding to the surge of energy that rippled outward. And yet, beneath all that power, his voice when he spoke was soft, almost tender. Stay behind me. Alara wanted to argue, to tell him that he was still too weak, that she had risked everything to save him only for him to walk into another death. But something in his tone silenced her. It wasn't command, it was protection. The kind that didn't ask for obedience, it demanded trust. She nodded once. The Alpha stepped forward, the last of the firelight brushing his back. His eyes gleamed gold in the dimness, bright as the rising sun. For the first time since his fall, he no longer looked like a man broken. He looked like a king remembering what it meant to be feared. And as the forest swallowed him, Alara realized with a chill that her act of mercy had awakened something far greater than a fallen Alpha. She had set loose a destiny that would not be stopped, not by silver, not by war, not by fate itself. The first breath of dawn had barely touched the edge of the forest when the silence broke. It was not loud, not yet, but deep, alive with the murmur of footsteps muffled by damp soil and the faint metallic rhythm of blades brushing against armor. Somewhere beyond the mist, death was coming. Alara clutched her son against her chest, her heart beating in uneven pulses that echoed the whispers between the trees. The air itself seemed to tense around them, the way the world holds its breath before a storm. The Alpha King stood at the mouth of the hollow, his body still battered, his movements measured but alert, every breath, every motion balanced between exhaustion and fury. The faint light of the fire licked across his bare shoulders, illuminating the faint shimmer of his scars, reminders of betrayal, pain, and power barely contained. He didn't speak for a long moment. He didn't need to. The forest spoke for him, leaves trembling, roots whispering warnings beneath their feet. Then, quietly, he turned toward her. His voice was low, controlled, but laced with something primal. "Take the child. Stay close. When I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back." Alara wanted to protest, wanted to tell him that she could help, that she wasn't helpless. But one look into his eyes silenced her. There was no room for argument there, only command, born from centuries of leadership, of battles fought and kingdoms ruled. The sound of pursuit grew nearer. Wolves. She could smell them now, their musk, their iron, the faint sweetness of wolfsbane mixed into their weapons. Hunters of their own kind. The Alpha King inhaled deeply, the scent of blood and metal stirring something ancient inside him. His jaw tightened, his muscles coiled, and in that instant, the fragile man she had nursed back from the brink vanished. In his place stood the creature legends were born from. The king of beasts. A shiver of power rippled through the ground as he stepped forward. His eyes burned bright gold, molten and terrible, their light cutting through the fog like fire through silk. For the first time, Alara saw the edge of what he truly was. The sheer, uncontainable strength that had once ruled entire clans. It wasn't human. It wasn't even wolf. It was something older, something divine. He tilted his head slightly, listening. "They're 6, he murmured. 2 in front, 4 circling from behind. They think I'm weak." His mouth curved into a small, bitter smile. "Let them." The first of the attackers appeared through the mist. Tall, lean, their eyes gleaming with cold triumph. They bore the sigil of the northern pack, once sworn to the king's banner. Now they came as traitors. "Your Majesty," one of them called mockingly, his voice slicing through the quiet. "You should have stayed dead." The Alpha didn't move. He merely lowered his head slightly, a gesture so calm it was almost reverent. Then the world erupted. In one motion, he leapt, faster than sight, faster than sound. The mist exploded around him, torn apart by the force of his movement. When he struck, it was with the weight of the wild itself. Bones cracked. Steel shattered. The air trembled with his roar, deep, resonant, and powerful enough to make Alara's knees buckle. It wasn't a sound meant for mortal ears. It was the cry of a king reclaiming his right to exist. The others hesitated, just long enough for him to strike again. He moved like lightning, a blur of fury and grace, each motion precise, each blow deliberate. But for all his strength, he was still healing, and Alara saw it in the way he faltered, just slightly, after the third strike. Blood darkened the ground, his and theirs, mingling like an ancient pact. Alara wanted to run to him, but instinct, or maybe faith, kept her still. The child whimpered softly in her arms, sensing the chaos, and she pressed a hand over his ear. When the fourth wolf lunged from the shadows, it came for her. A blur of gray and claws and teeth, too fast to think, too close to scream. But before it could reach her, the alpha moved. He was there in an instant, catching the creature mid-air. The impact drove them both into the earth, and for a moment, all she saw was a storm of motion, claws, teeth, blood, and fire. Then silence. The wolf lay still, and the alpha rose slowly, breathing hard, his chest heaving. The faint lines of exhaustion carved across his face did nothing to diminish his power. They only made him seem more real, more mortal, more alive. He turned to her then. Their eyes met through the thin haze of smoke. Run. She hesitated, only for a heartbeat, then turned and fled, clutching Aaron close. The forest stretched before her in an endless blur of green and shadow. Roots tore at her feet, branches lashed against her arms, but she didn't stop. Behind her, the sounds of battle echoed, growls, the crash of bodies, the thunder of rage. And then, abruptly, nothing. Silence. Complete. Terrifying. Alara. The voice was faint, distant, but it was his. She spun around, heart hammering. The mist had swallowed everything. She couldn't see him, couldn't sense him, only the lingering echo of his command. Alara, keep moving. The alpha's voice carried through the trees like a vow. I'll find you, no matter what. She didn't want to leave him. Every instinct screamed to go back. But her child's small hand tightened around her neck, grounding her, reminding her of what she had to protect. So she ran. The forest grew thicker, darker. The mist turned to rain, soft at first, then heavy, until every breath burned with cold. She stumbled through the undergrowth, half blind, half frozen, driven only by faith, faith that the man she had saved would live to find her again. Hours passed, or maybe only moments. Time lost meaning in the storm. Then, at last, she collapsed beneath an ancient oak, her arms still wrapped around Aaron. The rain washed the blood from her hands, from her hair, from the earth itself. The child slept, unaware of the war that had raged for him. And somewhere, far behind, in the heart of the forest, the Alpha King stood amidst the bodies of his enemies, victorious, but barely standing. His golden eyes dimmed, his strength flickering like the last ember of a dying fire. He fell to his knees, his voice a whisper to the wind. Alara? And though no one could hear him, the forest did. It carried his name through the rain, through the roots and rivers, through the pulse of the earth itself. Until it reached her. Alara stirred, her head lifting as a strange warmth brushed against her heart, faint but certain. He was alive. Somewhere out there, he was still fighting his way back to her. For the first time in years, she closed her eyes not in fear, but in hope. The storm passed. The world held its breath again. And deep within the shadows of the forest, a bond older than blood began to awaken, fragile, unspoken, unstoppable. The night had deepened into something endless by the time the rain began to fade. What little moonlight there was filtered through torn clouds, casting pale streaks across the soaked earth. The forest no longer howled with the sound of pursuit, yet the silence it left behind was worse, too still, too heavy, as if the world itself was waiting for something. Alara crouched near the dying fire she had built hours earlier, her son asleep beside her, wrapped in what was left of her cloak. Every crackle of ember echoed inside her chest like a heartbeat she didn't trust. She had run until her legs failed her, until the air itself had turned against her lungs. But the woods refused to end, the path refusing to reveal where safety lay. And in that endless running, she realized the truth, she had left him behind. The image of him, bloodied, unyielding, his body a wee pawn forged of rage and grief, was burned into her mind. She'd seen the way his strength faltered, how his breath caught as though his own body had turned on him. He was alive when she ran. She wanted to believe he still was. But hours had passed, too many. The wind stirred, carrying with it a faint metallic scent. Blood, old but near. Alara's head snapped up. Every instinct screamed danger. She pressed her hand gently over Aaron's chest, feeling the tiny rhythm of his heart. He stirred, murmured softly, and fell quiet again. "Sleep," she whispered. Her voice was almost gone, cracked from crying, from calling out into an empty forest that gave no answer. "Just sleep, my heart. He'll come. I know he will." Yet even as she said it, her voice trembled. The mist thickened again, creeping low along the ground, twisting through the trees like something alive. And then, from somewhere in the distance, came the faint crunch of a footstep. Alara froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Another step, then another. The sound was uneven, dragged, as though each movement cost more than the last. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She reached for the dagger she had taken from one of the fallen wolves, her hand shaking as she gripped the hilt. "Who's there?" she called softly, though her voice quivered too much to sound brave. No answer, only that slow, dragging tread, drawing closer through the fog. "Alara?" The voice was hoarse, low, barely more than a whisper, but she knew it instantly. Her breath shattered. "Lucian?" She rose, nearly tripping over her own feet as she stumbled toward the sound. The dagger fell forgotten from her hand. The mist parted, and there he was. The Alpha King stood at the edge of the clearing, his figure barely recognizable beneath the layer of blood and dirt. His shirt was torn open, his chest covered in slashes that still wept crimson. His hair clung to his face, matted and wet, his golden eyes dulled to amber. For one terrible heartbeat, Alara thought he was a ghost. Then he took a step toward her. And another. "Alara," he said again, softer this time, almost as if her name itself was keeping him upright. She ran to him. When she reached him, her hands collided with his chest, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She didn't know whether to hold him or to scold him for surviving this way. "You," her voice broke. "You fool. You're bleeding." He swayed, the weight of his body pressing against hers. She could feel the tremor running through his muscles, the warmth of his blood seeping between her fingers as she caught him. "I told you," he rasped, a faint, crooked smile ghosting across his lips. "I'd find you." Then his strength gave out entirely. Alara sank to her knees with him, her arms wrapping around his shoulders, pulling his head against her chest. His body was too heavy, too still. Panic clawed at her throat. She pressed her ear to his heart and listened, there. A slow, steady beat. Weak, but alive. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely. "Do you hear me? Don't you dare leave now, not after everything." He made a faint sound, half laugh, half groan. "Bossy, even now." Alara almost laughed too, but the tears came instead. "Quiet. You're not allowed to talk." She tore a strip of her cloak and pressed it to one of the deeper wounds along his ribs. He hissed softly but didn't pull away. Every movement sent a tremor through him, but he endured it in silence, eyes half-lidded. The light from the dying fire flickered across his face, casting gold and shadow in equal measure. "You should have run farther," he murmured. "They could have followed." "They didn't," she replied. "And even if they did, you're here now." For a moment, their gazes locked. It was a quiet thing, that look, no words, no promises. Just two souls that had fought too long and too hard finally finding each other in the dark. Then he closed his eyes, exhaustion overtaking him. She stayed like that for what felt like hours, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, adjusting the makeshift bandages, whispering to him whenever his breath hitched. When at last he stirred again, the first light of dawn was brushing the edge of the clearing. "How long?" he asked weakly. "Long enough," she said softly. "But the worst is over." He smiled faintly, though it looked painful. "You said that before, and I'll keep saying it until it's true." Something in her voice made him open his eyes again. "Alara, thank you." She shook her head. "Don't. You don't thank someone for saving the only thing they have left to believe in." He looked at her for a long time, as if trying to memorize every line of her face. "You're stronger than you think." "I'm not," she whispered. "I'm terrified." "Then you're stronger than me," he said quietly. The fire burned low. Birds began to stir somewhere high in the trees. The world was beginning to wake again, as if unaware that everything in Alara's life had changed forever. She helped him to his feet, though he leaned heavily on her shoulder. They moved slowly, step by step, through the clearing toward the faint path beyond. Aaron stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. When they reached the edge of the forest, Lucian stopped. His hand brushed her cheek, rough and trembling. "I shouldn't have made you run," he said. "I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, but I nearly did anyway." "You didn't lose me," she replied, her voice breaking. "You found me. That's what matters." He looked past her, toward the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to rise, a bleeding red streak against the pale blue sky. "The pack will come," he murmured. "They'll see me as weak for what I've done." "Then let them," she said fiercely. "Let them see what strength really looks like." He smiled at that, small but real. "You speak like a queen." "I speak like someone who's tired of running." Lucian's gaze softened. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb lingering against her skin. "Then we don't run anymore." For a long moment they stood there in silence, the morning light spilling across them, the forest breathing quietly around them. There was blood still drying on his skin, the scent of battle clinging to him, but there was also warmth, a promise in his touch that spoke of something new. Not just survival, belonging. He leaned down, his forehead resting gently against hers. "Together, then," he whispered. "Together," she echoed. And as the first true rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, the Alpha King, once bound, once hunted, took his first step toward a future that was not built on power, but on love and loyalty born in fire. Alara followed, their shadows stretching side by side across the earth, long and unbroken. The world ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she did not fear it. The journey back to the Northern Territory began at dawn, when the air still smelled of rain and ash. Every breath of wind carried the scent of soil, blood, and rebirth. The forest seemed to shift around them as if watching, whispering stories of what had been lost and what was being reclaimed. Lucian walked ahead, his body still battered, his pace slower than it once was, but the way he carried himself had changed. He was no longer the hunted. He was returning as what he was always meant to be. Alara followed beside him, carrying Aaron against her shoulder, wrapped in furs that smelled faintly of smoke and salt. The boy slept soundly, unaware that his small heartbeat had become the pulse that drove both his parents forward. Neither spoke much. Words felt too fragile for what lingered between them: grief, relief, exhaustion, and something deeper, something wordless that had begun to bloom in the silence. When the trees finally broke open into a clearing, Alara stopped. The horizon stretched wide before them, a vast field of golden grass leading to the distant spires of stone and flame that marked the Northern Pack's stronghold. Her breath caught. It had been years since she'd seen it, years since she'd watched the fortress towers gleam in the sun. Once, they had represented safety. Now, they looked like the sharp edge of judgment. Lucian stood still beside her, his jaw tightening. "They won't welcome me." "They will," Alara said softly, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "You're their king." "I was their king," he corrected. "Now, I am a ghost. And ghosts are not welcomed back by those who fear them." He took another step forward, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. The wind caught his scent, alpha blood, old and unforgotten, and carried it far ahead, to where the guards at the border would soon catch it. And just like that, the howls began. Low at first, then rising. One, then two, then dozens. A chorus of voices, some filled with awe, others with rage. The sound rolled across the plains like thunder. Alara held Aaron closer. Her heart pounded as shadows began to move in the distance, figures racing through the tall grass, fur and steel flashing in the light. They were coming. Lucian straightened his back. The Alpha King was no longer wounded. The pain was still there, yes, every cut, every scar, every memory carved into his flesh, but he wore it now as armor. When the first warriors emerged from the grass, they froze. The lead guard, A tall man with gray fur streaking through his hair stumbled back, eyes wide. "Alpha," he whispered. "It can't be." Lucien's voice was calm. "It is." The warrior dropped to his knees before instinct could even catch up to his thoughts. The others followed suit, confusion etched across their faces. Some were trembling, others looked ready to flee. No one dared to look directly into those golden eyes. "You thought me dead," Lucien said, his tone quiet but carrying through the air like a storm. "You left me bound. You left me to die. Tell me, Fenric, who gave the order?" The gray-haired warrior swallowed hard. "The council, my lord." They said what?" Lucien interrupted, stepping closer. "That I had fallen? That the throne was better off in their hands? That I was too cruel, too wild, too dangerous to rule?" The warrior couldn't meet his gaze. Lucien exhaled slowly. "Then it is the council that will answer to me." He turned to Alara then, his expression softening. "Stay here. Protect the boy." But she shook her head. "I've hidden long enough." "Alara, you said we wouldn't run anymore," she said quietly. "If you face them, I face them too." Something in her voice left no room for argument. Lucien studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then stay close." Together, they walked through the ranks of kneeling wolves. The murmurs followed them, disbelief, reverence, fear. By the time they reached the gates of the fortress, the entire stronghold seemed to have fallen silent. The council awaited them in the courtyard, 5 elders, each wrapped in ceremonial robes, the sigils of the northern pack gleaming on their chests. Their eyes were cold, their smiles thin. At their center stood Lord Kale, tall, silver-haired, and still bearing the scar that Lucien himself had given him years ago. His expression was unreadable. "So," Kale said finally, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "The dead king returns." Lucien's gaze was sharp enough to cut steel. "You should be kneeling." Kale laughed softly. "And yet here I stand." "You were gone, Lucien. The pack needed leadership. I provided it. You betrayed me. I saved the pack from you." Lucien took another step forward. The air between them shifted, thickening with raw dominance, the kind that pressed down on the chest and made lesser wolves tremble. "Saved them?" Lucien said softly. "You call selling your own kind to the hunters saving. You call sending your alpha to die mercy." Kale's smirk faltered. "You can't prove that." Lucien's eyes gleamed gold, and his voice dropped to a low growl. "I don't need to prove what I can smell on your soul." The courtyard went utterly still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Kale stepped back, but only slightly. "You're weak, Lucien. The moment I saw you tied to those tracks, I knew your reign was over. The pack needs strength, not pity." Lucien smiled then, not kindly, but like the ghost of something wild and beautiful and terrible. "Then let's remind them what strength is." Before Kale could react, Lucien moved. He didn't shift, not fully, but the aura that burst from him was almost visible. The ground shuddered, the air cracked. Every wolf in the courtyard fell to their knees as pure dominance flooded the space like a tidal wave. Kale stumbled, clutching at his chest as his body bowed under the weight of it. His eyes widened in disbelief. Lucien's voice was a whisper. "You call yourself Alpha, yet you can't even stand before me." Kale roared and lunged, shifting midair into a massive silver wolf, his claws outstretched, his fangs gleaming. But Lucien was faster. In one motion, he caught Kale by the throat and slammed him to the ground. The impact cracked the stones beneath them. Kale struggled, snapping and thrashing, but Lucien's strength was unyielding. The courtyard filled with gasps. "Yield," Lucien said softly. Kale snarled. "Never." Lucien's grip tightened. The golden light in his eyes blazed brighter, and for a moment, it seemed as if the world itself bent around his will. "Then I strip you of your name, your title, your right to lead. You are no alpha. You are nothing." With that, he released him. Kale collapsed, shifting back into human form, gasping for air. Lucien stood tall, blood dripping from his arm where Kale's claws had caught him, but he didn't falter. He looked around at the others, his voice steady, cold, and final. Does anyone else challenge my right to rule? No one spoke. Not a single voice dared rise. The silence that followed was thick and sacred. Alara stepped forward then, her son still sleeping against her shoulder. Her gaze swept across the gathered wolves, their awe, their confusion, and then settled on Lucian. He turned to her, and in that moment, the ferocity in his eyes softened into something entirely different. He took her hand, drawing her forward. This woman, he said, his voice echoing through the courtyard, saved your king. She faced the wilderness, the hunters, and death itself to keep life alive. He looked at the council, at the warriors, at every face turned toward him. You will show her the respect you show me. Because without her, there would be no Alpha King standing here today. A murmur rippled through the crowd, uncertain, then reverent. One by one, they began to lower their heads. Alara blinked, her eyes glistening. She had never asked for honor. Never sought it. Yet as the pack bowed before her, something inside her finally eased, the part that had always felt small, invisible, unworthy. Lucian turned back to her, his fingers brushing against hers. It's over, he said softly. We're home. And for the first time in years, the word home didn't sound like a dream. The northern pack fortress, once a place of stone and silence, now pulsed with tension. Lucian had reclaimed his throne, and yet the victory did not bring peace. The sun had barely risen over the high walls, scattering silver across the cobblestones, but within the shadowed halls, darkness lingered still. Alara walked beside him, her hand brushing his as they moved through the corridors. The boy, Aaron, now awake, clutched at her cloak, curious but cautious. He had slept through the chaos of the courtyard, blissfully unaware that the throne had been reclaimed through blood, power, and the fury of a king returned from death. Lucian's stride was steady, but there was an edge to it. Every sense, every instinct, sharpened. The scent of betrayal clung to the air like a slow, invisible fog, and he could feel it pressing against him from the walls themselves. The council is quiet, Alara murmured. Too quiet. Lucian didn't answer immediately. He could sense it too. The way the shadows seemed heavier here, the flicker of movement behind closed doors, the barely audible whispers carried through the stone corridors. The elders who had once knelt in awe now held their breath, waiting for something to fall, and in this tension, he felt the pulse of the pack's fear, and their disloyalty. They reached the council chamber, a massive room of polished stone and carved emblems, the high ceiling letting in shafts of light that cut like knives through the dust-laden air. The council members were gathered, seated in their ancient chairs, eyes fixed on the Alpha King. Lucian's gaze swept across them, slow and precise. There was Fenric, still trembling, who had given him over to death. There was Kale, sullen and silent, nursing both humiliation and rage. And then there was Mara, the shadow he had not yet anticipated. She was seated at the far end of the chamber, cloaked in black, her hair falling like a waterfall of midnight. Her eyes glimmered with intelligence, ambition, and danger, and when their gaze met, a shiver ran down Lucian's spine. She had been the silent observer, the one who had orchestrated events from the shadows, manipulating others with subtle words and promises. He hadn't realized it at first, but the evidence was unmistakable. She had not only betrayed him once, she had shaped the betrayal, weaving it into the very fabric of the council's decisions. Lucian's hand brushed Alara's, a silent reassurance. "Stay close," he murmured. Alara nodded, sensing the storm about to erupt. "Alpha King," Mara's voice was smooth, melodic, venom wrapped in silk. "It seems you have returned. And yet, I wonder how long such strength can last. A king cannot rule on fury alone." Lucian's eyes gleamed gold, the fire of his dominance igniting. "I do not need to rule on fury. I need only act on truth. And the truth is clear. You and your schemes end today." Mara smiled faintly. "Schemes? You think you understand the game, Lucian? You were bound and left to die, yet you claim to see the moves I made? You cannot. He stepped forward, his presence filling the room like a tide. Every muscle coiled, every breath measured. I do not need to see all your moves. I need only know the outcome. The pack is mine, the throne is mine, and I will not allow a shadow to poison what I have reclaimed. A murmur went through the council. Some whispered fearfully, others doubtfully. Mara remained unmoved, her lips curving into a mocking smile. Then she rose, tall, lithe, the embodiment of elegance and menace. You were gone, Lucian. You returned, but do you truly know what waits behind the throne? Do you know the debts that were paid in your absence? Lucian's voice dropped, low, resonant, a growl beneath the calm. I know enough. He moved closer, closer still, his aura of raw alpha dominance radiating outward. The room seemed to shrink around him. Mara did not flinch. Most of the council did. Fenric's knees threatened to buckle, Kale's hands clenched at his robes. You mistake my patience for weakness, Lucian said softly, but patience is a luxury I no longer afford to those who betray me. Mara's eyes flickered, and for a moment, there was doubt, but only a fraction. Then she drew herself taller, her gaze sharp and unyielding. You will need more than patience to survive the consequences of your return. The pack will test you. Your throne is not secure until every thread of deceit is unraveled. Lucian's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. Then let us begin. At that moment, the doors of the council chamber burst open. Soldiers, loyal to Lucian, filed in silently, surrounding the chamber. Mara's plan had underestimated one truth. The bond of blood, loyalty, and fear was still alive in the pack. Lucian's presence, raw and unshakable, radiated through the room. Mara's confident smile faltered just slightly as he stepped forward and placed his hand on the carved emblem of the Alpha throne. This, he said, voice echoing through the chamber, is the seat of justice. And justice will be delivered, not through whispers and shadows, but through truth and strength. Alara moved closer to him, her hand brushing his side. Her eyes met his, filled with quiet support and spoken trust. She did not need to say a word, she would stand with him through whatever came next. The council shifted uneasily, their whispers turning to silence as the full weight of Lucian's authority descended upon them. Mara's eyes narrowed, recognizing finally that the Alpha she had sought to manipulate had returned stronger, more aware, and more dangerous than she could have imagined. Lucian stepped fully into the center of the chamber. His golden gaze swept across each member of the council. Every betrayal will be named, every scheme unmasked, and every wolf who threatens the pack's peace will answer to me directly. For the first time, the room felt truly still. Every breath held in anticipation, every shadow waiting to see whether the Alpha would show mercy or wrath. He turned to Alara, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. Stay with me, he whispered. Not as a pawn, not as a shield, but as my equal. Together, we face this. Together, we reclaim what is ours. Alara's hand found his, squeezing tightly. Together, she whispered back. The first ray of sunlight cut through the high windows, illuminating the chamber, and in that light, Lucian and Alara stood side by side, Alpha King and his Omega, ready to confront not just the shadows of the council, but every darkness that had ever dared to touch their lives. For the pack, for the throne, and for the life they were beginning to build together, nothing would remain hidden, nothing would go unchallenged. The shadow in the council had been revealed. And now, the reckoning could begin. The northern pack fortress hummed with a tense, almost electric energy. Every corridor, every shadowed corner, seemed alive with whispers, suspicion, and the low, rumbling heartbeat of the pack itself. The council, once a bastion of authority and guidance, now shifted uneasily under Lucian's watchful gaze. Their eyes darted, their hands twitched, and the faintest flickers of fear betrayed the realization that the Alpha who had returned was no longer the same man they had once tried to control. Lucian moved through the halls like a storm. Contained within human form, every step he took was deliberate, measured, yet resonant with authority. His golden eyes swept across each face he passed, reading the subtleties of loyalty and deceit with uncanny precision. Those who had doubted him now trembled. Those who remained true looked to him with relief tempered by awe. Alara stayed close, her hand brushing against his as they walked. Erin slept securely in her arms, blissfully unaware of the political storm unfolding around them. Yet even in her vigilance, Alara could feel the tension pressing against them. The Council's betrayal had been just one thread. Unraveling it entirely would require patience, cunning, and the kind of force only an Alpha King could wield. The council chamber had been prepared for the confrontation. Sunlight streamed through the high, narrow windows, illuminating the polished stone floor and casting long shadows across the faces of the gathered elders. They had assembled under duress, each aware that the Alpha King's patience was fraying, and that the reckoning they had so desperately tried to avoid was now inevitable. Lucian entered with deliberate grace, the aura of dominance radiating from him like heat from a furnace. He did not sit. Instead, he let his gaze sweep across every member of the council, lingering on Mara, whose composure now threatened to crack under his scrutiny. "Today," Lucian began, his voice calm but heavy, "we settle what has been left unresolved. Those who betrayed the pack, those who sought to manipulate the throne, will answer for their actions. No shadows, no whispers, no lies will remain hidden." A shiver went through the chamber. Fenric shifted in his seat, Kale's hands clenched at his robes, and Mara's eyes, sharp and calculating, flickered with unease. She had spent months planning, orchestrating, manipulating. And yet, here, before her, Lucian's presence alone dismantled her confidence. "You will speak," Lucian said, his gaze pinning Mara in place. "Every deception, every act of betrayal, and you will answer for it." For a moment, Mara's lips parted, then pressed together in a thin line. "You cannot rule through fear alone, Lucian," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "The pack respects strength, yes, but loyalty cannot be demanded, it must be earned." Lucian's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "Loyalty is earned, yes. But it is also tested. You have failed that test." He stepped closer, and the room seemed to shrink beneath the weight of his presence. His voice dropped, almost to a whisper, yet carried through the chamber with undeniable power. "Tell me, Mara, how many wolves were sacrificed for your ambition? How many lives were jeopardized because you sought to manipulate the Alpha's throne?" Her composure faltered. Fenric and Kale shifted uneasily, the reality of Lucian's wrath settling over them like a heavy fog. "I did what I had to do," Mara said finally, her tone defensive, sharp. "The pack needed direction. You were gone. The throne, it needed stability." Lucian's gaze was relentless. "Stability built on betrayal is not leadership. It is weakness." He turned, sweeping his golden eyes across the remaining council members. "Who else is guilty? Who else has compromised the pack for personal gain?" A murmur rippled through the chamber. One by one, the council members were forced to reveal their transgressions, small deceptions, hidden alliances, secret plots. Lucian listened to every word, absorbing the truth, judging the intent, and measuring the loyalty that remained. Alara stepped closer, her voice calm but unwavering. "Every wolf here has a choice," she said softly, yet her words carried. "Stand with him, stand with the pack, or face the consequences of betrayal." Her presence beside Lucian strengthened him, her courage lending weight to his authority. Erin stirred in her arms, eyes opening briefly to blink at the sunlight, a living symbol of the future they were protecting together. Lucian's eyes returned to Mara, and for the first time, his voice carried the subtle edge of finality. "You have one chance to redeem yourself. Speak honestly, and prove that your loyalty to the pack is true. Fail, and you will answer to me directly." Mara's lips pressed into a thin line, then parted slightly. "And if I fail?" Lucian's golden gaze locked with hers. "Then you will be removed. Permanently. The pack cannot survive divided. It cannot survive betrayal." The room fell silent. The weight of his words pressed down on every wolf present. Even those who had remained loyal felt the intensity of the moment, The realization that Lucien's return was not merely symbolic, it was a reckoning. As Mara finally nodded, acknowledging the power of his presence and the inevitability of justice, Lucien exhaled slowly. His hand brushed against Alara's, a brief, grounding touch, a reminder that even amidst fury and authority, there was tenderness, there was life, and there was hope. "Let this be the beginning," Lucien said quietly, though the chamber heard him clearly. "The pack will no longer be governed by fear, by deception, or by shadows. From this day forward, loyalty will be recognized, betrayal punished, and the Alphas will honored, for the good of all." The council bowed, some reluctantly, some with genuine understanding. Mara remained seated, her gaze fixed on Lucien, a flicker of respect now mingled with her remaining defiance. Lucien turned to Alara, his golden eyes softening. "The reckoning is done, for now. But the pack must heal, and we must lead together. Are you ready to face what comes next?" Alara's hand squeezed his. "Always," she said, her voice firm, her heart steady. Lucien exhaled, tension in his body melting slowly, the storm inside him receding just enough to allow the warmth of her presence to reach him. "Then let us begin the true work of rebuilding, of creating a future that is ours, together." Outside, the first rays of sunlight spread across the northern pack lands, illuminating a fortress alive with possibility. A pack bound not just by fear or duty, but by loyalty, truth, and the unbreakable bond between an Alpha and his Omega. And for the first time in years, Lucien allowed himself to believe that they could endure anything, as long as they stood together. The northern pack lands were bathed in a cold silver light as night crept across the horizon, stretching long shadows over the fortress walls. Even after the council's reckoning, a tremor of unease lingered in the air, not of betrayal, but of challenge. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a new threat stirred, one that would test not only Lucien's authority but the bond he shared with Alara and the fragile peace they had begun to rebuild. Lucien stood atop the highest watchtower, the wind tugging at his dark hair, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. Every instinct, honed over years of survival and leadership, screamed that danger was coming. The scent of it was faint at first, smoke, iron, and fear, but unmistakable. A rival pack, larger and more ruthless than any they had faced in decades, had begun moving across the borders. "Alara," he called softly, his voice carried by the wind. She emerged from the shadows of the chamber below, Aaron asleep against her chest. Her eyes met his, wide with the mixture of concern and resolve that never left her. "They are coming," he said, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "And they are not here to negotiate." Alara's grip tightened around Aaron, her mind racing. "What do you need me to do?" He turned to her, the fire of his alpha presence softened by something gentler, almost human. "Stay close. Protect the boy. And remember, we face this together." For a moment, the night was silent, holding its breath in anticipation of the storm to come. The first of the rival scouts appeared just as the moon broke through the clouds, their shadows twisting across the golden fields like creeping predators. Lucien descended the tower silently, his movements precise and fluid, as though the wind itself obeyed him. By the time he reached the courtyard, the pack had gathered at his side, loyal wolves ready to fight for the Alpha who had returned from death itself. He stopped in the center of the courtyard, letting his presence fill the space, letting the pack feel the weight of his authority and the undeniable promise of protection. "They come for blood," he said, voice low and resonant, "but they will find only unity. Stand with me, and we protect what is ours." Alara stepped forward, her eyes reflecting the moonlight, unflinching. "They will not break us," she said, voice steady. "Not while we fight together." The Alpha King nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her courage. Every wolf in the courtyard could feel it, the unspoken bond, the fierce love that had grown between them, now manifesting as strength that no outsider could touch. From the tree line came the first war cry, guttural, raw, and filled with the promise of violence. Lucien signaled to the pack. A dozen wolves leapt forward, leading the charge, while he moved to the front with Alara at his side, her eyes fierce, her stance unwavering. The clash was immediate. The enemy was strong, their teeth and claws like knives in the night, but they had not counted on the Alpha returned from death, nor on the bond that tethered him to his Omega. Lucian moved like a storm, every strike measured, every motion lethal. The golden glow of his eyes became a beacon of fear and power, radiating authority that could bend even the fiercest opponents to his will. Alara fought alongside him, a blur of motion and determination. Her courage was not born of skill alone but of love, of the primal instinct to protect what mattered most. She deflected attacks, guided weaker pack members, and when a rival attempted to strike at Lucian's flank, she was there in an instant, her dagger sharp and precise. Even as the battle raged, Lucian found brief moments to glance at her. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, a world of understanding passed between them. Each knew the other's fears, the other's limits, the other's unshakable devotion. Every enemy that fell to the ground became a testament to their unity, a proof that their bond was more powerful than any threat. Hours seemed to pass in a blur. The air smelled of iron, sweat, and rain-soaked earth. Wolves howled in defiance and in pain. The enemy faltered, sensing that the battle was no longer one of numbers but of will. Lucian roared, a sound that shook the very ground beneath them. The golden light of his eyes flared, and in that moment, every rival realized the truth. They were not facing just a man, not just a pack, but a force of nature, fueled by love, vengeance, and unyielding authority. The enemy's leader, a massive wolf with scars that spoke of countless battles, charged directly at Lucian. Steel and shadow collided as the Alpha met him head-on, teeth bared, claws flashing. Alara stayed close, guiding Eren behind her, yet ready to strike any who came too close. The duel seemed endless, a dance of death and survival. But slowly, surely, Lucian's strength, honed by pain and tempered by rage, turned the tide. With a final, earth-shaking strike, he sent the rival crashing to the ground, defeated, the remaining wolves scattering in panic. Silence fell over the battlefield. The rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening in the moonlight, blood and water mixing on the grass. Every wolf that remained looked to Lucian, awe and respect in their eyes. He turned to Alara, lifting her hand to brush her cheek gently. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice soft now, carrying the weight of relief and exhaustion. "No," she whispered. "We survived." He pulled her close, letting the adrenaline of the battle fade into a quiet warmth. "Together," he murmured, pressing his forehead against hers. "Together," she echoed, her voice steady, filled with certainty. The pack gathered around them, a living testament to loyalty, love, and survival. Lucian and Alara stood side by side, holding each other as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, spilling gold across the battlefield. For the first time in years, the Alpha King allowed himself to feel not only triumph but peace, the kind that comes from knowing that no challenge, no enemy, no shadow could sever the bond they had forged in fire and blood. And as Eren stirred against her chest, opening wide, curious eyes to the world, Lucian knew this. The challenges would come again, as they always did. But they would face them, together, Alpha, Omega, and the pack they had rebuilt with sweat, sacrifice, and unbreakable love. The dawn stretched across the land, promising not just survival, but a future shaped by their hands. The fortress of the northern pack lay bathed in the soft glow of dawn, the morning sun spilling gold across its stone walls and the fields beyond. For the first time in years, there was calm, but it was not the fragile peace that comes after fleeting battles. It was a deep, enduring quiet that spoke of strength, unity, and survival. Lucian stood at the highest balcony, the wind tugging at his dark hair, his golden eyes sweeping over the lands he had reclaimed, lands that now belonged to the pack and, more importantly, to the future he and Alara would build together. Alara approached silently, Eren nestled in her arms. She moved with a quiet grace that mirrored the calm of the morning. Even after the storms, the betrayals, and the battles, there was a resilience in her that Lucian had never ceased to marvel at. She had been the constant in the chaos, the light that had guided him when even he had doubted his own strength. "You've kept them in line," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough warmth to make him glance down at her with a faint smile. Lucien's lips curved, though the weight of his responsibility lingered. "They've learned that the Alpha does not forgive betrayal lightly, but they've also learned loyalty when it counts." Alara set Aaron down at the balcony's edge, letting the boy stretch and take in the vast expanse of their lands. The child's small hands reached toward the horizon as if trying to grasp the freedom and hope that now surrounded them. Lucien watched him, feeling a deep swell of pride and love, not just for the boy, but for the life they had fought so desperately to protect. He turned to Alara, stepping closer, his presence a warm shield against the cool morning breeze. "The battles are over," he said quietly, though his tone carried the weight of experience and vigilance. "The pack has seen what it means to have a true alpha, and they have chosen to stand with me. With us." Alara's hand found his, squeezing gently. "And you've chosen to let me stand with you," she whispered. "Not behind, not beneath, but beside." Lucien's gaze softened, golden eyes meeting hers in a depth of emotion that words could scarcely contain. "Always," he murmured. "Beside you, beside him, beside our pack. Whatever comes, we face it together." A gentle breeze rustled through the balcony, carrying the scent of earth and grass, of life renewed. It was a reminder that the world beyond the fortress walls was vast, unpredictable, and sometimes dangerous, but no longer insurmountable. They had survived darkness, betrayal, and death itself. Now, what lay before them was not just a kingdom to govern, but a life to cherish. Alara stepped closer, her forehead resting against his. For a long moment they stood like that, the Alpha King and his Omega, bound not just by destiny but by the choices they had made, the sacrifices endured, and the love forged in fire. Behind them, the pack stirred, loyal wolves gathering in the courtyard below. Some carried the scars of the battles past, while others bore new marks of strength, yet all moved with reverence and respect. They had witnessed the return of their Alpha, the reckoning of the Council, and the victories that had solidified Lucien's reign. Now, they waited, patient and devoted, for the next chapter of their lives to begin under the guidance of a leader tempered by pain, love, and unwavering resolve. Lucien lifted his hand to rest lightly on Aaron's small head, the boy's dark eyes wide with curiosity and trust. "This," he said, voice steady, "is our future. Not just mine, not just yours, ours, and the pack's." Aaron smiled, reaching up to touch his father's hand, a gesture that carried innocence, hope, and the unspoken promise that life, in all its complexity and beauty, would continue. Alara's eyes glistened with tears, a mix of relief, love, and quiet joy. "We've fought so long to reach this," she murmured. "Yes," Lucien replied softly, his arms wrapping around her. In a protective embrace. "And now it is ours. The throne, the pack, our life, all of it." The morning sun climbed higher, casting light over the fortress, illuminating every carved emblem, every stone wall, every path they had walked together. It revealed the scars of past struggles, yes, but also the strength of a kingdom rebuilt and a love unbroken. Lucien lowered his gaze to hers, golden eyes filled with a quiet intensity that promised devotion, protection, and unwavering loyalty. "Alara, this is forever. What we've built together, it will endure. Nothing will take it from us, not shadows, not betrayal, not even time itself." Alara smiled, resting her hand over his heart. "Then we step forward together, into everything. And we do so as one," Lucien whispered. They watched the sun rise fully, spilling warmth across the lands of the northern pack. Below, the pack members looked up, understanding that the Alpha King and his Omega had not just survived, they had transcended every threat, every challenge, and every dark hour. They had become more than rulers. They had become a symbol of hope, unity, and enduring love. Lucien pulled Alara close once more, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, and then looked out across the horizon, his heart full. The battles had ended, the betrayals exposed, the enemies defeated. Now began the life they had fought for, a life built on loyalty, respect, and the unbreakable bond between Alpha, Omega, and the pack that would follow them through every dawn to come. In that moment, the fortress, the pack, and the world beyond seemed to hold its breath, not in fear, but in awe of the future unfolding. A future where love was strength, loyalty was honored, and the throne was theirs, forever. Alara rested her head against his chest, Aaron nestled between them, and together, they stood as one, Alpha, Omega, and their legacy, bathed in sunlight and promise. The Northern Pack had survived storms, darkness, and betrayal. But now, under the watch of Lucian and Alara, it would thrive. And so would they, forever bound, forever victorious, and forever home.